So I have to tell you that the first time I experienced the Unitarian Universalist Flower Communion was, I won't say which congregation, but it was a congregation in New England. And I came to church and there were flowers and you got to put a flower in a basket, and at the end you kind of went up and took a flower and left with a flower that's different than the one you brought. And I thought, okay, that's kind of pretty and cute and sweet, but there wasn't a lot of heft to it. And that's because no one explained on that day the origin, the powerful origin of this ritual that we are about to enact. And so I'd like to share this history that is important to Unitarian Universalists all around the world. It's the story of two brave people who had an idea about how to celebrate the beauty inside of each one of us and the beauty of the earth. It's a story of how, at a time of tension and division, does that sound familiar? A time of tension and division, people came together. It's the story of how and why the Unitarian Universalist Flower Communion was created. Now, the first time I heard the word communion used in a church, I was just about ready to run out the door, because the last time I had heard that word used was in a setting that did anything but affirm my inherent worth and dignity. But I did learn that communion, although it feels like a big old religious word, is actually just a beautiful, simple word that means sharing. So this is a story about sharing. Norbert Čapek was born in 1870 in the country we now call the Czech Republic, but at the time was called Bohemia. Norbert Čapek's family was too poor to send him to school, so they sent Norbert to live with his uncle Victor in Vienna, Austria. Norbert's uncle was a tailor, and Norbert worked and trained as his assistant. That was the way he was able to earn money for school. Norbert liked to learn. At school, he studied science and psychology, and he asked many questions about religion. Too many questions. Questions that challenged the faith in which he was being raised. Norbert asked, why does one person get to be in charge of the whole church and speak as the voice of God? And if there is a God, why do we need someone to talk to God for us? Why can't we do it for ourselves? And why are only men allowed to be priests? Why are only the men in charge? What about the women? And why can't we celebrate our differences instead of trying to make everyone think alike? Well, Norbert's uncle did not like that his nephew asked these kind of questions. The school did not like that Norbert asked these kind of questions. It felt dangerous. And Norbert's uncle said to him, if you want to make it in the world, then you better keep your mouth shut and your mind closed. When Norbert grew into an adult, he still hadn't figured out how to be spiritual in a way that felt authentic to him. He was struggling to be true to himself, but also to be true to the only religious tradition he knew, which seemed out of sync with who he was becoming. Then one day, while reading newspapers in a library, he noticed a woman also reading newspapers. You know, when you get that gut, you need to meet them. And so he took a chance and he introduced himself to her. Hi, I'm Norbert Čapek. The woman responded, hi, Norbert. It's good to meet you. I'm Maya Veronica Octavek. As they talked together in the library, Maya and Norbert realized they were both educated people with similar interests in developing themselves intellectually while also helping other people. Norbert decided to take a risk and share his spiritual struggles with Maya, not being sure how she was going to respond. Maya replied, "Norbert, it isn't as complicated as you are making it. I think you're a Unitarian." Norbert responded, "What's a Unitarian?" Maya smiled and said, "Unitarians respect each person's own individual spiritual search for truth and meaning. They affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all people while also believing that all life is interconnected and interdependent, which means they also believe they're called to prioritize and protect the most vulnerable. This interconnectedness of all life means they are also called to protect planet Earth, as it is our shared home. They respect diversity and difference, and they see that as a spiritual strength. They aren't looking to force sameness on anyone, but rather they teach that we do not need to think alike to love alike." Norbert's response was succinct. "If that's what it means to be Unitarian, sign me up." Norbert and Maya fell in love. Y'all great stories have to have love story in it. And they got married. Soon after, they decided to serve more fully their new religion. They went to seminary, and after several years, they were ordained, Reverend Maya and Reverend Norbert. At the time, just over 100 years ago, there were only less than a handful of female Unitarian ministers. Maya was a trailblazer and a pioneer. In 1921, in the city of Prague, in what is now called the Czech Republic, Maya and Norbert started a Unitarian church together. People from many religious backgrounds came to their new church. Many of them were frustrated and felt out of sync with the teachings of their former religions. This church still stands today. I actually took that photograph. They came to Maya and Norbert's congregation because they wanted to be part of a church that taught religious values that resonated with them. They also wanted to be part of a religious spiritual community because they didn't want to face the complexities and the harshness of life all by themselves. They wanted companions for the journey. This was 3 years after the end of World War I. The trauma, death, and destruction of that war to end all wars was still all around them. Think of the images you've been seeing of Ukraine, and worse, 100 years ago. In that aftermath of the war, Maya and Norbert wanted to do something to bring people together and to remind them that even in the most brutal and soul-crushing of times, there was still beauty and hope in the world. They wanted to create a ritual that would be open and understandable to everyone. One May morning, Maya looked outside their church office window and noticed flowers growing in the church garden. Maya said to Norbert, "These flowers remind me of beauty and hope." She continued in words summarized by Fred Small, "In the ugliness of oppression, flowers celebrate the eternal hope of freedom. In the face of cruelty, they speak of courage and hope. In the meadow, they speak of freedom, creating patterns wild and breathtaking that no gardener can match. In their indescribable beauty, flowers remind us that we live always in the face of ineffable mystery. In their reappearance each year, flowers remind us that in spite of every hardship, life goes on." And so, together, Maya and Norbert created the Flower Communion. They asked everybody to bring a flower with them to church. As they arrived, everyone placed their flowers in a vase. Placing the flowers there represented that each person came into the church by their own free will. The children then carried the vase to the front of the church, and the congregation blessed the flowers together. The congregation, not the ministers, blessed the flowers together. After the service, as people prepared to leave, they went to the vase and each took a flower different from the one that they had brought with them when they arrived. So what did this flower communion symbolize? No two flowers are the same. Together, the many different flowers form a beautiful bouquet. This bouquet would not be the same without each individual flower. So it is with us. Our church would not be the same without each and every one of us, no matter how different we may be. For we are all part of the great bouquet of creation. We are all, in the end, different and one and beautiful. Maya and Norbert introduced the flower communion 99 years ago on June 4th, 1923. The people in Maya and Norbert's church liked the flower communion and the caring community it represented. Their church in Prague became the largest Unitarian church in the world with over 3,000 members. But something happened that threatened the flower communion. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis took control of Prague and Bohemia. Immediately, Maya and Norbert's church was labeled dangerous by the invading oppressors. The Nazis did not want a church like the Chopeks. They did not want a flower communion that celebrated differences. They did not want Maya and Norbert Chopek preaching the Unitarian message that all people are born with inherent worth and dignity. They did not want them teaching that we are all connected and responsible for each other. Suddenly, Maya and Norbert and the congregation found themselves in uncharted and uncertain times. They were frightened. Many in the congregation were threatened or beaten or taken from their homes and put in prison. Some Unitarians had their houses or businesses robbed, shut down, or burned down by the Nazis. Others worried that they would be the next to be disappeared. The Chopeks were regularly questioned by the Gestapo. Norbert and Maya did not criticize Hitler during their sermons. They remained silent to protect their lives. But Maya and Norbert and members of the congregation formed a resistance group that met secretly at the church and helped Jews and other people escape from Prague. But finally, Maya and Norbert couldn't take it anymore. They knew that their Unitarian Universalist faith compelled them to speak out against the horror being perpetuated around them. In the spring of 1941, Norbert declared, "We can bear it no longer. We must speak the truth and not be cowards." That Sunday, during his sermon, Norbert directly challenged the Nazis by contradicting the hateful speech Adolf Hitler had given earlier in the week. Norbert excoriated Hitler for his lies and his cruel inhumanity. 5 days later, the Gestapo came to their home and arrested Norbert. Because of his sermon, the Nazis said it was, quote, too dangerous for Norbert Chopek to be allowed to live. Norbert was sent to Dachau, the concentration camp. On his papers were stamped the fatal instructions, quote, "Chopek's return is unwanted." While at Dachau, Norbert introduced the prisoners to the flower communion. Each prisoner brought what flowers they could find in the concentration camp to a special service. At the end of the service, the prisoners left with a flower different from the one they brought. One brought by their fellow prisoners to symbolize their sense of connection and community, even in that brutal, horrible place. The prisoners were strengthened by Norbert's words and inspired by the inclusive Unitarian flower communion that was open to anyone, no matter their religion. They liked that this simple ritual reminded them there was still beauty and goodness in the world. After the war, survivors testified that the Unitarian minister could not have been sent to a place where he was more needed. Norbert brought hope and resilience to the Jewish, Christian, Unitarian, Gypsy, lesbian, gay, transgender prisoners in Dachau. Norbert's ministry there ended when he was transported with other older prisoners to the section of the camp where barbaric medical experiments were conducted on elderly prisoners. These were the last words Norbert wrote to his beloved wife and partner in ministry, Maya. The goal of religion is to create strong, confident, active, creative, loving persons who are happy with themselves and with nature, humanity, and the spirit of life. Maya fled Prague. She came to the United States as an immigrant and refugee. It was a difficult time, but she was welcomed with open and understanding arms. Because Maya was allowed to enter this country as a refugee and as an immigrant, she was able to offer the unique gift she brought with her from the congregation in Prague. Maya brought the flower communion to America. She first introduced it at the Unitarian Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but soon she began to share the flower communion ritual all over the country. She shared it because she believed that the hardest times and the most dire moments are not strong enough to rob us of our capacity to share love. Not even death can take from us the love that is exchanged between people. It is with us for as long as we have love to offer. It is with us whenever we are open to receiving love from others, by offering what we can, by making room to receive the offerings of others. We carry with us the hope for the future. Que así sea, bendito sea. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.